Bury me here. Alien girl begged. Human pulled the palm fronds, and he was shocked to see her body. The suns of Kalor burned mercilessly overhead, twin orbs painting the barren desert in searing gold. The wind dragged grit across the land like knives, scouring the bones of a dead colony that had once dared to call this wasteland home. Broken spires jutted from the sand, metal frames of collapsed domes twisted like the skeleton of some ancient beast. Nothing lived here now. Nothing dared. Except him. Captain Marcus Hale trudged forward, his boots sinking into the dust, his breath rasping through the filters of his cracked rebreather. His armor had seen better days. Scratched plating, dented shoulder guards, faded insignia of a regiment long disbanded. Once the Terran banners he carried had terrified worlds. Now they marked him as nothing more than a relic. A soldier without a war, a man without a home. The desert did not care who he had been. He was here because he had nowhere else left to go. His outpost lay 3 days' march behind him, a lonely shack of scavenged plating and rusted circuits. He only came out this far when he needed to, when supplies ran low, when the ghosts inside his head grew too loud to ignore. Out here, among the ruins, at least the silence of the dead competed with his own. That was when he saw it. A scatter of broken, palm-like fronds, alien flora dried to brittle husks, half-covered a shape in the sand. At first he thought it was another corpse. The wastes were littered with them. Raiders rarely buried their prey, and the desert always claimed the rest. Marcus would have passed it by. He'd seen too many bodies to flinch anymore. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the fronds shifted slightly against the wind, like someone had tried, pathetically, to hide her. Maybe it was the faintest sound carried on the gust, not the whistle of grit, not the creak of old metal, but something softer. He dropped to one knee, his gauntlets brushing the brittle leaves aside. And there she was, a young woman, no, not human. Her skin shimmered faintly lavender beneath the dust and bruises, patterns of faint bioluminescence flickering weakly across her arms. Alien, but humanoid. Slender frame twisted awkwardly in the sand, her dress torn to scraps of woven fiber, her lips cracked and bleeding from thirst. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, cloudy with pain. And then came the whisper. Bury me here. Not help me, not save me, just that. The words struck Marcus harder than any plasma round he'd taken in the war. His chest tightened, an old wound tearing open inside him. He had buried too many before, comrades whose names he'd forgotten, civilians who hadn't deserved the fire that rained from orbit, children who never had a chance to grow. He had thrown soil on too many graves, walked away from too many ghosts. Now this one asked him to do it again. For a moment, he froze. His mind screamed to walk away. Let the desert finish what it had started. She wasn't his problem. Nothing was his problem anymore. But his hands betrayed him. Trembling, they slid under her fragile frame. Her body was light, frighteningly so, her bones pressing through bruised flesh. He felt the faint pulse against his armor, each beat a fragile defiance against death. He whispered again, weaker this time, voice almost lost to the wind. Please, bury me here. Marcus clenched his jaw. He thought of Emily, his wife buried under the rubble of a Terran bombardment gone wrong. He thought of Daniel, his boy, lost to sickness when the medships never came. He thought of the orders he had followed, the settlements they had burned, the innocents left behind in flames, and something inside him refused. No, he muttered hoarsely, surprising even himself. Not today. With a grunt, he lifted her, cradling her against his chest. Every step back toward his half-buried transport was heavier than the last, not because of her weight, but because of what she represented. He wasn't just carrying a broken alien girl. He was carrying the truth of a past he thought he had buried forever. The journey back was a blur of heat and grit. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her breaths shallow, her skin burning with fever. Marcus forced water between her lips from his canteen, cursing at every cough, every tremor that racked her body. By the time they reached his outpost, the suns were sinking, bleeding red light across the horizon. The structure was little more than a shack of welded scrap, its roof patched with scavenged plating, its power core sputtering like a dying heart. But it was shelter. It was all he had. He laid her gently on the only cot, fetched a cracked tin cup, and coaxed water past her lips again. Slowly, faint color returned to her cheeks, the glow of her skin flickering steadier. For the first time, her eyes opened fully, luminous silver orbs locking on him. Her voice cracked, but he heard it. Lyra. It took him a moment to realize she was telling him her name. Lyra, he repeated quietly, as if saying it would anchor her to life. Her lips trembled in something almost like a smile. Then she slipped back into shallow sleep. Marcus sat in the corner, helmet set aside, scarred face buried in his hands. He had no business saving anyone. He was no hero. He was the opposite. But for reasons he could not name, he had chosen to keep this one alive. And already he feared what it would cost. Hours passed. Lyra stirred fitfully, whispering fragments of memory through fever. A village burned, screams in the night, shadows in human armor, chains. A cage where men laughed and bartered like it was a market of souls. Marcus sat rigid in his chair, each word another blade twisting in his chest. He knew that story. He had lived it from the other side. He told himself not to listen. He told himself she didn't need his guilt. She needed water, rest, survival. But the words crawled inside him anyway, lodging like shrapnel. When she quieted again, he rose and stepped outside. The desert night had fallen, colder than steel. Stars spread thick across the sky. He gazed up at them, the silence pressing against him like judgment. "Why her?" he whispered to the empty dark. "Why now?" No answer came, only the wind. But deep inside, Marcus already knew. The universe was giving him one last chance. The next morning, Lyra's eyes opened clearer. She drank, ate a ration bar he softened in water, and finally managed to sit up. She studied him silently for a long while, her expression unreadable. Then she asked simply, "Why?" Marcus blinked. "Why what? Why save me?" Her voice was still rough but steady. "Others passed. They always pass. You didn't." Marcus looked away, jaw tightening. The truth was too heavy, too dangerous. So he gave her only the shard of it that wouldn't break her. "Because humans, we don't bury hope, not if we can help it." She tilted her head, faint glow pulsing along her cheekbones. It was the smallest of gestures, but he felt the weight of it. Trust, curiosity, maybe even the faintest flicker of warmth. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something stir in his chest that wasn't anger or regret. It was dangerous, but he didn't push it away. Out in the distance, the desert stirred. Somewhere beyond the horizon, riders moved, metal mounts kicking up dust, signals flickering against the stars. Trouble was never far on Kalor, and Marcus knew deep down that finding Lyra half buried in the sand was no accident. The ghosts he carried weren't done with him. Not yet. The outpost was quiet the next morning, save for the creak of cooling metal and the low hum of the generator sputtering to life. Thin shafts of sunlight stabbed through gaps in the patched walls, dust swirling like golden smoke. Marcus busied himself at the workbench, sharpening a vibroblade with slow, measured strokes. But his eyes kept drifting toward the cot. Lyra was awake. She sat upright now, her back braced against the wall, clutching the thin blanket around her shoulders. Her silver eyes scanned the cabin as if she had just been dropped into an alien world, which for her this shelter probably was. Her bruises were still angry purple, but her skin's faint bioluminescent patterns pulsed steadier now, like a heartbeat regaining strength. Marcus caught her gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. "You'll need more than water," he said finally, breaking the silence. He rummaged through a crate and pulled out a ration pack. Not much of a feast, but it'll keep you standing. Lyra accepted the pack gingerly, tearing into the softened protein with trembling hands. She ate slowly, each bite careful, as though she wasn't sure the food wouldn't be snatched away. Marcus looked away, pretending to check his weapon. It reminded him of prisoners. He hated that. When she finished, her voice rasped across the silence. "You didn't answer me yesterday." Marcus turned, brows drawn. "About what?" Her luminous eyes locked on him. "Why you saved me? What do you gain?" Marcus's jaw tightened. He searched for words, but none came easy. Finally, he said, "I told you, because humans don't bury hope." Her eyes narrowed. "Hope?" The word carried both wonder and bitterness. "Where I come from, hope is a lie told by slavers. They promise release. They promise mercy. None comes." Marcus said nothing. She pulled the blanket tighter, gaze distant. "I was taken when I was small. My village was burned to the ground. They came in the night, men in black armor, carrying fire in their hands. They lit the sky red. My parents, they screamed once, then silence." Her voice cracked, and Marcus felt his chest cave in. He could see it, too clearly. He had been there. Not at her village, maybe, but at villages just like it. Human soldiers storming alien settlements under orders, under the flag of Earth's conquest. He had ridden with men who torched homes, who dragged children screaming into cages. He'd told himself it was survival, that they were the enemy, that he had no choice. Now one of those children sat in front of him. Lyra's gaze lowered to her bruised arms. "After the flames, they sold me, passed from master to master. Some wanted work, others wanted—" She shuddered. "When I finally escaped, I thought I was free. But freedom in the desert is just another cage. That's where you found me." Her eyes rose again, burning now. "So tell me, Marcus Hale of Earth, why? Why not let me die?" He froze. He knew his name. He must have seen the insignia on his chest plate. He had been careless. His throat felt dry. The truth swelled inside him, pressing to escape, but he shoved it down. She wasn't ready. He wasn't ready. "Because you deserve more than they gave you," he said at last, voice low. Her expression softened slightly, confusion flickering where bitterness had been. She said nothing more, curling under the blanket. Within moments, exhaustion dragged her back into sleep. Marcus sat in silence, the vibroblade idle in his hands. His reflection stared back at him in the steel, a scarred, hollow man who had built the very cages she spoke of. And she didn't even know. The days passed in uneasy rhythm. Marcus taught her to walk again, steadying her as she shuffled across the cabin, his arm a firm brace. He rationed their supplies tighter, giving her more than he kept for himself. At night, when the desert cooled and stars blanketed the sky, they sat by the small heater, speaking in fragments. She told him about the songs her people used to sing, hymns of light that kept the darkness at bay. She hummed one once, voice raw but hauntingly beautiful, and Marcus found his chest tightening at the sound. He hadn't heard music in years, not since his wife, not since Earth had felt like home. He told her little of himself, only scraps, that he had once worn a uniform, that he had lost everything, that the desert was the only place left for him. She didn't press, but her eyes lingered on him with quiet questions he couldn't bear to answer. One night the storm came. A wall of sand rolled across the plains, hammering the outpost with a fury that shook the walls. Marcus secured the hatches, reinforced the generator shielding, then sat across from Lyra as the world howled outside. "Does it always rage like this?" she asked, voice raised over the roar. "Sometimes worse," Marcus replied. He offered her a flask of water. She sipped, then passed it back, her fingers brushing his. The touch lingered longer than it should have. Her eyes studied him in the flicker of the lantern. "You carry shadows." He froze. What? Shadows, she repeated softly. When you look at me, your eyes carry pain, guilt, like you've seen me before. Marcus's breath caught. He masked it with a cough, looking away. Everyone out here carries ghosts. She tilted her head, faint glow tracing across her cheekbones. Maybe, but yours are heavier. The silence stretched, filled only by the storm's wrath. Marcus gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. He wanted to tell her, to confess, to let the truth fall like the storm outside. But he didn't. Instead, he whispered, "Rest, the storm will pass." She held his gaze a moment longer, then lay back down, though sleep did not come easily for either of them. The storm broke by dawn. The desert glittered under pale sunlight, cleansed and sharp. Lyra stepped outside, barefoot, feeling the cool sand beneath her feet. For the first time since he'd found her, Marcus saw her smile. It was faint, tentative, but real. "It feels alive again," she murmured. He watched her quietly, a strange warmth stirring in his chest, something he had long buried under scars and ash. But as the moment lingered, so did his dread, because he knew what was coming. The desert did not give gifts without taking something back. And when it came, she would learn the truth about him. That evening, they shared another meal of ration stew. Lyra leaned back, exhaustion softened by comfort. She glanced at him, silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim cabin. "You said humans don't bury hope," she said suddenly. He nodded slowly. "Then maybe," she continued, voice gentle, "maybe you were meant to find me." The words struck deeper than she could ever know. Marcus swallowed hard, hiding behind his cup. He didn't deserve those words. He didn't deserve her trust. But as her voice faded into silence, he found himself daring, just barely, to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could earn it. For the first time in years, the night felt less empty. And that terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. Far across the desert, beyond the dunes and broken spires, 3 riders moved beneath the stars. Their mounts were armored, their banners tattered, their laughter carrying faint across the night. They were hunting, and Lyra was the prize they meant to reclaim. The desert was still when the sound came. Marcus heard it first, low and rhythmic, like thunder rolling across sand. Hoofbeats, though not of flesh. The metallic pounding of armored mounts. He froze at the workbench, spanner in hand, listening. The sound grew louder, sharper, cutting through the silence like a war drum. Lyra emerged from the cabin, her faintly glowing skin pale under the rising suns. "What is it?" she asked, her voice edged with unease. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Riders." Her eyes widened, and a tremor passed through her. "They found me." Marcus didn't ask how she knew. He could see it in the way her body tensed, in the fear coiling behind her silver eyes. Whoever they were, she'd been running from them long before he'd pulled her from the sands. He grabbed his rifle, slung it across his back, and stepped out onto the porch. Dust curled along the horizon where the riders approached. 3 figures mounted on mechanized beasts, spines of steel and eyes glowing crimson. They cut across the desert like predators that had scented blood. Marcus rested a hand near the sidearm, holstered at his hip, his stance calm but coiled. Beside him, Lyra clutched the doorframe, breath ragged. The riders slowed as they neared the outpost, the lead mount stamping into the dust with a hiss of hydraulics. Its rider swung down, boots crunching against the sand. He was tall, armored in plates scavenged from battles past, his face half shrouded by a respirator. When he pulled it aside, Marcus saw eyes like knives, cold, cruel, certain of victory. "Marcus Hale," the man drawled, voice sharp as broken glass. "Didn't expect to find you alive out here. Guess even ghosts need a place to rot." Marcus's expression didn't change. "You know me, then you know I don't scare easy." The man smirked. "Not here for you, old soldier. We want what you're hiding. The girl. Give her over, and we'll leave your scrap heap standing." Behind him, the other 2 dismounted, weapons gleaming in the sun, Shock rifles, curved blades meant to terrify more than kill. Their gazes slid to Lyra, and she shrank back, clutching the doorframe tighter. Marcus stepped off the porch, boots sinking into the sand. His hand hovered near his pistol, but didn't draw. His voice came low, steady, heavy as iron. "She's not yours anymore." The smirk faltered. The leader's eyes narrowed, his tone turning sharp. "You think you can keep her? She belongs to us, to the masters who paid for her. She's property." Marcus's glare burned like the sun's. "Not while I breathe." For a heartbeat, silence held, the desert frozen between violence and retreat. Wind rattled the loose metal of the outpost. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The leader's smirk returned, but thinner now. He spat into the sand. "This ain't over, Hale. Enjoy your last sunrise." He yanked the reins, the mounts hissing as they turned back toward the horizon. Dust swallowed them, but Marcus knew better than to believe it was finished. He stood there long after they were gone, the weight of his weapon heavy at his side. Inside, Lyra's hands trembled as she gripped the table. "They'll come back, with more. They never stop." Marcus's chest ached at the fear in her voice. He reached across the table, resting a calloused hand over hers. "Then let them. They'll find I'm harder to break than they think." Her eyes met his, wide and searching. For the first time, he saw trust flicker there. A fragile thing, but real. The reprieve lasted only days. It began with the acrid smell of smoke. Marcus woke to it, his instincts snapping him upright before dawn. He rushed outside, rifle in hand, and saw it. Flames licking up the side of the storage shed. Sparks leapt into the sky, carried by the desert winds. Shadows of riders galloped away, their laughter echoing faint across the sands. "Damn it," Marcus growled, racing toward the fire. Lyra stumbled out behind him, eyes wide. She grabbed the bucket, filling it at the cistern, and rushed to his side. Together they beat at the flames. Marcus with a shovel, Lyra with trembling hands sloshing water across the inferno. The heat seared his lungs, smoke clawing down his throat. He refused to stop, even as the fire devoured the walls. By the time the last ember died, half the shed was gone, the air heavy with ash. Marcus collapsed onto the porch, soot streaking his scarred face. That shed had held more than supplies. It had been built with his wife's father, long before war had taken everything. Watching it burn felt like losing her all over again. Lyra sank beside him, coughing through the smoke. Her glowing skin shimmered faintly in the dark, bruises glistening with sweat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head, voice rough. "Not your fault." But deep inside he knew the truth. She was the reason they came, and if they destroyed one shed, they'd come for more. 3 nights later, the desert brought another visitor. This one came alone. A weary man rode into the yard, his beard silvered, a badge gleaming on his chest. Marcus stiffened at once, hand dropping to his weapon, until recognition struck. "Callahan," Marcus muttered. The man dismounted with a grunt, dusting sand from his coat. His eyes were sharp despite the lines carved by years of war. "Been a long time, Hale." "Not long enough," Marcus said, though his tone carried a rough respect. Callahan smirked faintly. He had been Marcus's commander once, a brother in arms during Earth's expansion campaigns. Now he wore the badge of marshal in this sector, a lawman where law was more rumor than fact. They sat inside the cabin, Lyra silent in the corner, while Marcus told him of the riders, the fire, the threats. Callahan listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. Finally, he shook his head. "These men won't quit, Marcus. Not unless someone with pull makes them." "And who's got that kind of pull in Tombstone Station?" Marcus asked, voice flat. Callahan's eyes glinted. "I do." Later that day, Callahan rode into Tombstone Station. The settlement reeked of smoke and cheap liquor, its saloons filled with cutthroats who thought themselves kings of the frontier. Callahan pushed through the swinging doors of one such den, his badge catching the lamplight. Inside, the riders lounged with their leader at the center, mugs of sour ale in hand. Laughter stilled as Callahan's boots struck the floor. "Hey, you boys lit fire to a man's shed," the marshal said, voice cutting like steel. "That's blood in the dirt, and you know it. If you want to stay breathing in this sector, you're done chasing that girl." The leader sneered, drunk with arrogance, but even he didn't laugh in Callahan's face. The marshal carried weight. Both lawmen and outlaws knew better than to cross him openly. One by one, the riders drifted out, leaving their mugs behind. The leader lingered, eyes burning, before finally pushing past with a growl. "This ain't over," he muttered. Callahan only watched him go. Back at the outpost, Marcus told Lyra the news. For the first time, relief softened her features, though doubt still lingered. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "Men like that never stop." Marcus sighed, lowering into a chair, heavy with thought. "Maybe not, but you're safe for now." Her silver gaze searched his face. "Why risk this for me? You could have walked away." He met her eyes, the weight of years pressing down on him. "Because I've walked away too many times." She said nothing, but the faintest glimmer of understanding passed between them. That night, as crickets sang and the desert cooled, Lyra hummed one of her people's hymns. Her voice trembled, but the melody wrapped around the cabin like a fragile shield. Marcus sat by the fire, rifle across his knees, listening. For a fleeting moment, the ghosts inside him grew quieter. But he knew the truth. The fire they'd set in his shed would not be the last, and the ghosts he carried would not stay buried forever. Because the girl he had saved carried a past tied to his own, and when she learned it, nothing would ever be the same. The desert nights grew quieter after Callahan's warning in Tombstone Station. For a week, no riders appeared on the horizon, no fires rose against the sky. The silence should have been a gift. Instead, it felt like the stillness before a storm. Marcus repaired what he could of the ruined shed, patching metal plates with scavenged welds. Lyra helped where her strength allowed, carrying buckets of water, sorting tools with careful hands. She healed faster now. The bruises faded, the glow of her skin brightened, her silver eyes clearer than the first day he found her. And with every step she regained, Marcus felt his chest grow heavier, because he knew what she did not. At night, when the desert cooled and the stars sprawled endless above, Lyra sat across from him by the fire. She began to ask questions. "Did you have a family?" Marcus stiffened. The fire popped, sparks twisting into the night. "Yes," he said finally, "once." "What happened?" He stared into the flames, seeing Emily's face, hearing Daniel's laughter. Both gone now, buried beneath war and sickness. "They're not here anymore." Lyra lowered her gaze, voice soft. "I'm sorry." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not unkind. She told him of her people's songs again, of the way they sang to the stars during harvest, believing the light above carried the voices of ancestors. "When I was taken," she whispered, "I thought the stars had abandoned me. But maybe they sent you." The words carved deep into Marcus. He wanted to believe them. He wanted to let that fragile hope live. But the truth clawed at him. He had been there, at villages just like hers. He had marched with soldiers under Terran banners, torches in their hands, orders ringing in their ears. He had watched homes burn. He had turned his face away from screams. And he couldn't bury it forever. The confession came 3 nights later. They sat by the fire again, Lyra humming softly, her voice steadier now. Marcus's hands shook as he cleaned his rifle, not from the weapon, but from the words building inside him like a storm. "Lyra," he began, his voice low. She stopped humming, looking at him curiously. "There's something you need to know." Her eyes narrowed faintly, but she said nothing. He stared into the fire, seeing not flames but memories. Villages burning, Soldiers laughing, children crying. His voice broke when he forced the words out. I was there. Lyra frowned. Where? Your world, Marcus whispered. Not just yours, others. I rode with them, with the men who burned. I didn't stop it. I told myself it was orders, survival. But I was there. The silence that followed was a blade. Lyra's hands trembled in her lap, her silver eyes wide and unblinking. She searched his face, hoping for denial, for some twist that would make the words false. None came. Her breath shuddered out, sharp and broken. She rose unsteadily, backing away from the fire, from him. You! Her voice cracked. You were one of them! Marcus stood, reaching out instinctively. Lyra, don't! The word lashed like a whip. Her glow flared brighter, silver light pulsing harsh with her heartbeat. You carried me from the sand. You gave me water, safety. And all this time, you were one of the men who took everything from me. Marcus's chest burned. I wasn't the one who... He stopped. Excuses felt like ash. I didn't light the torch, but I didn't stop them either. That's the truth. Lyra shook her head, tears streaking through the dust on her face. You saved me from dying in the desert, but you're the reason I had to crawl through it in the first place. Her words crushed him more than any battlefield wound ever had. Lyra, I can't change what I did, Marcus said, voice rough. But I can choose now. I can protect you. I can fight for you. Her eyes blazed with grief and fury. Fight for me? You fought against me long before I could even stand. She turned away, grabbing what little she owned, a blanket, a flask, the knife Marcus had given her. She moved toward the door, her steps unsteady but determined. Marcus's throat tightened. Where will you go? The desert will kill you. She paused at the doorway, her back to him. Better the desert than trusting a man who once watched my people burn. And then she was gone, swallowed by the night. Marcus sat alone in the cabin, the fire dying to embers. The silence was suffocating. He stared at the empty cot, at the blanket she had left behind, at the ghost of her presence that still lingered. He had known this moment would come. He had told himself he could prepare for it. He was wrong. The outpost felt colder without her, emptier than it had in years. And for the first time since he found her, Marcus wondered if saving her had been the cruelest act of all, giving her hope only to shatter it with truth. Lyra didn't get far. She had barely crossed the dunes when the riders found her. 3 of them again, their mechanized mounts cutting across the sand like wolves on a scent. She tried to run, but her body was still healing. The riders surrounded her, weapons gleaming in the moonlight. Well, look what we've found, the leader sneered. Thought you could hide forever, little light? Lyra's heart pounded. She clutched her knife, but her hands shook too much to fight. The leader laughed, raising a shock rifle. Your human friend isn't here now. Guess it's back to the cage with you. A rifle cracked. The leader's weapon spun from his hand, smoking. The rider spun in shock, and there he was, Marcus, striding across the sand, rifle raised, eyes cold as the stars. Lyra's breath caught. For a moment she saw not the soldier of her nightmares, but the man who had carried her from the desert, who had kept her alive when death had already claimed her. The riders regrouped, snarling. The leader hissed, You should have stayed buried, Hale. Marcus's voice came low, steady, deadly. Maybe, but I'm not done yet. The desert erupted. Shots seared the night, mounts screeched, blades clashed. Marcus moved with the precision of a soldier honed by years of war, rolling behind dunes, firing controlled bursts, using the terrain like a weapon. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but he fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Lyra watched, torn between horror and awe. This was the same human who had once stood among the men who burned her world, and yet now he fought like the only shield she had left. One rider fell, his mount crashing into the sand. Another's weapon exploded under Marcus's shot, but the leader pressed hard, driving Marcus back with relentless strikes. Lyra's chest heaved as she clutched the knife tighter. Memories of her people's songs rang in her ears. Songs of light defying darkness, of standing when the stars seemed gone. She didn't run. When the leader charged Marcus, blade raised high, Lyra lunged from the side, driving her knife into the raider's leg. He roared, stumbling, and Marcus's shot found his chest. The man collapsed into the sand, still at last. Silence fell. The desert wind howled, carrying smoke and blood with it. Marcus lowered his rifle, chest heaving. Lyra stood trembling, knife flick with blood, silver eyes wide. Their gazes met. No words passed. Too much had been said already. But something had shifted. By dawn, they returned to the outpost in silence. Marcus patched his wounds in the cabin, the air thick with unspoken words. Lyra sat apart, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the dim glow of the heater. Finally, she spoke. "You were one of them. You can't undo that." Marcus's hand stilled. His voice was rough when he answered. "I know." She turned, her silver eyes glistening. "Then why? Why fight for me now?" He looked at her, weariness etched deep into every scar. "Because I can't change the past, but I can choose who I am today. And today, I choose to stand between you and them." Lyra's gaze held his, torn between anger and something softer, something she didn't want to name. She turned away, but she didn't leave. That night, Marcus sat outside under the stars, rifle across his knees. The desert stretched silent and endless. He knew more riders would come, not just 3, dozens, maybe hundreds. The storm he had feared was no longer distant. It was here. And when it broke, he would face it, alone if he had to. But when Lyra stepped outside and sat beside him, silent, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm, Marcus realized he might not face it alone after all. The desert had never been so still. Marcus could feel it in his bones, the hush before the storm, the way the wind seemed to pause as if the very planet held its breath. He sat outside the cabin, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon where dawn bled into gold. Lyra sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. They hadn't spoken much since the battle with the 3 riders. Words were brittle things now, easy to shatter. But silence had a weight of its own, and in that silence, something fragile had begun to grow again. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first flicker of understanding. "Will they come back?" she asked at last, voice soft against the desert air. Marcus didn't look away from the horizon. Yes, and not just 3 this time. Her breath caught. How many? Enough to finish this once and for all. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, silver eyes glimmering. "Then we should run." Marcus shook his head. "There's nowhere to run. Not out here. They'll hunt us until the sands take our bones. The only way out is through." Lyra fell silent. She wanted to argue, but she saw it in his eyes. The cold, steady resolve of a man who had lived too long with ghosts. By nightfall, the riders came. Not 3, not 5. A dozen mounts thundered across the dunes, their crimson eyes glowing, their riders armored in scavenged plates, weapons blazing in the moonlight. At their head rode the same leader who had survived Tombstone's saloon, his chest scarred, but his hatred alive. Marcus stood in the yard, rifle ready, the lone figure between the riders and the cabin where Lyra waited. The leader reined his mount, sneering down at him. "You could have walked away, Hale, but you had to play the hero. Now you'll die for nothing." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "I've died for worse." The leader laughed, raising his hand. "Burn it all." The riders roared forward. The first volley lit the night. Plasma bolts streaked across the sand, scorching the cabin walls. Marcus rolled behind the water trough, returning fire with calm precision. Each shot dropped a rider, his rifle spitting fire into the darkness. He moved like the soldier he once was, efficient, unyielding, every motion born of years on the battlefield. But there were too many. Lyra clutched the doorframe inside, terror clawing at her chest as she watched Marcus stand against the tide. He was only one man, one human, and yet he didn't falter. She remembered his words, "Humans don't bury hope," and for the first time she understood. Marcus triggered the traps he had laid during the long, quiet days after the fire. Charges buried in the sand erupted, tossing mounts into the air. Tripwires snapped, dropping steel beams across the rider's path. The desert itself became his weapon, each trick born from desperation and cunning. Still, they pressed harder. Plasma bolts tore through the trough, grazing his arm. Heat seared his flesh, but he gritted his teeth, firing back, dropping another rider. Pain lanced through him, sharp and merciless, but he refused to fall. Lyra's heart pounded as she watched him stagger, blood staining his armor. She couldn't stay hidden. Not anymore. She grabbed the rifle Marcus had left inside, her hands trembling, and rushed into the night. "Lyra, no!" Marcus shouted, but it was too late. She raised the weapon awkwardly, firing bursts of light into the chaos. She missed more than she hit, but her presence drew fire away from him. Marcus cursed under his breath, covering her flank, fighting harder, faster. Together they carved a path through the storm. The riders regrouped, circling, their leader bellowing commands. "Kill the human! Take the girl alive!" Marcus's breath came ragged now, his vision blurring. He had been shot before, cut before, burned before, but never like this. His body screamed for rest, but he forced it to keep moving. Because behind him was Lyra, and if he fell, she was lost. He reloaded with bloody hands, rising to face the next charge. His voice thundered across the desert, raw and unyielding. "You want her? You'll have to bury me first." The riders charged, weapons blazing. The fight was chaos, sand and fire, blood and light. Marcus fought like a man possessed, every strike fueled by years of regret, every shot a prayer for redemption. He moved with a fury that startled even Lyra, as if his very soul had been forged for this last stand. One by one the riders fell, but so did Marcus. A plasma bolt tore across his side, another burned through his shoulder. He staggered, dropped to one knee, forced himself up again. His armor was shredded, his body broken, but still he fought. Lyra screamed his name as he collapsed behind the wreck of a mount. She ran to him, dragging him to cover, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, please, stay with me." His eyes were dim, his breath ragged, but he smiled faintly. "Not done yet." He shoved the last grenade into her hands. "When I say throw it," her hands shook. "I can't." "You can. You have to." The leader's laughter echoed as he strode forward, sword gleaming. "End of the line, Hale. Should have known you'd die protecting trash." Lyra's eyes blazed, fury burning away her fear. She clutched the grenade tighter, Marcus's voice in her ears. "Humans don't bury hope." Marcus rose with the last of his strength, drawing his sidearm, placing himself squarely between Lyra and the leader. "Now!" he shouted. Lyra hurled the grenade. It exploded in a blinding wave, fire consuming the last riders, their mounts shrieking as they toppled into the sand. The leader stumbled, armor shattered, and Marcus's final shot struck true. The man fell, still and silent. The desert was quiet again. Lyra dropped to Marcus's side, cradling him in her arms. Blood soaked his armor, his breath shallow and faltering. "You can't leave me," she whispered, tears streaking her glowing skin. "Not after everything." Marcus's gaze softened, his scarred face etched with something like peace. "I told you, humans don't bury hope. They fight for it, even when they're broken." Her tears fell onto his chest, glowing faintly in the starlight. "You saved me, Marcus. You gave me back my life." He smiled weakly, eyes drifting closed. "Then it wasn't for nothing." And with that, the last breath left him, carried away by the desert wind. Dawn broke. Lyra stood on the porch of the outpost, the desert stretching endless before her. The cabin behind her still stood, scarred but unbroken, like the man who had defended it. She looked to the horizon where Marcus had made his stand, where the sand was still scorched from fire and blood. Her heart ached, but beneath the grief burned something stronger. Resolve. He had given his life for her, not out of orders, not for conquest, but for choice, for redemption. And she would carry that choice forward. As the suns rose higher, she whispered into the wind, voice steady despite the tears. You weren't the worst thing you ever did, Marcus Hale. You were the man who fought for me, and I will not forget. The desert wind carried her words across the dunes, into the endless sky. And somewhere among the stars, a soldier's ghost finally rested.